Hi, and welcome to Concussion Talk Podcast. My name is Nick Mercer. I write Concussion Talk blog, www.concussiontalk.com. Please check it out for my blogs, more podcasts, and details on my ebook Detour. This is podcast number 12, and in it I'll be talking to Dr. Nick Reed, who is co-director of the Concussion Centre at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Toronto. The three pillars of which are education, research, and clinical services. We discuss all three. I will now get Nick to introduce himself and say what he does at Holland Bloorview Concussion Centre at Holland Bloorview Hospital. So, Nick, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. Happy to be on the podcast. You're doing great work raising awareness in concussion, and we're always thrilled to contribute to any of these initiatives. So kudos to you for all your work. And so I represent the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. I'm a clinician scientist in the Bloorview Research Institute here at our hospital in Toronto, and I'm also the co-director of our concussion center. And so our program is growing. We're somewhat the new kids on the block here at Holland Bloorview, where our program is almost 3 years old now, and we're really structured around a research program that's looking specifically at identifying, assessing, and treating concussion specific to kids, and also a clinical program where we have a hospital-based concussion clinic for kids with persisting symptoms after a concussion. So persisting being having their symptoms for 4 weeks or longer. And we're working on a few other initiatives, clinical initiatives right now, where we're doing some baseline testing and some more what we're calling early care. So not just the kids with persisting issues, but getting them in earlier so that we can improve outcomes in the long term. And then finally, a big push of our program is educationally. So we have a pretty large education program where we have a series of educational materials, some infographics, a concussion and you handbook for kids and parents to really get a sense of how to manage their injury and give them some strategies to get back to their lives. And also we run an education program out of our hospital for any child or family that wants more information on concussion or how to get some help after they have it. So we run those weekly out of the hospital, and then we're out in the community all the time. So whenever if they're willing to have us at an event, whether it's a soccer tournament or a hockey game or a school event, or even we were at a corn roast this past summer, we'll be there, and we'll be there to educate whoever we can on concussion. So at the end of the day, our program, we touch on, as I said, research, clinical services, and education to do all we can locally, nationally, internationally to help kids with concussion get back to the things they need and love to do. And we try to have some fun while we do it, especially working with kids.
Yeah, I stopped by there. I was in Toronto in December, and I stopped by the Concussion Centre, so I met a few people from there. And so what area was I? Yeah, I met you in your office there area. So what area was I in? What area was I in then?
So there, we're housed. Our program was born out of research. So we're housed in the Bloorview Research Institute here at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehab. And so it's in our research institute, there's a range of different research labs, us being the concussion center, but there's also a lot of great work being done in kids with different conditions, different disabilities, cerebral palsy, autism. There's a really impressive group led by our VP of Research, Dr. Tom Chow, that looks into brain-computer interfaces. So with kids who aren't able to communicate verbally or even by using gestures or really anything, tapping into what the brain is doing and some of the what's going on inside the brain to do our best to help those kids communicate. So some really great work being done here in the Bloorview Research Institute. And when you came by in December, that's where we met. And I think you brought the snow with you from Newfoundland when you came.
I tried to keep back here, but it came with me, but only for a day. But I was there. Jay and Catherine showed me around, and Jay showed me a school there and like a swimming pool and the school area. The school connected to the hospital.
Yeah, that's right. So the hospital, it's actually Canada's largest pediatric rehabilitation hospital. And there are many different unique aspects. One being, like you mentioned, there's a school in-house in the hospital itself where kids that need additional supports, or kids that are extended stays here in the hospital in the inpatient unit, whether it be from a brain injury or a different injury that they've sustained, they can still get their education and still engage in school with teachers and support systems in place that they need to be successful. So a really unique aspect. And yeah, as you said, there's a great pool here. There's some interesting stories around the pool. It's a beautiful pool. They actually use it for community purposes as well. So not just in the hospital for therapy and treatment, but also to offer swimming lessons in the community. So it's always really, really busy. But the interesting part of the pool, it's heated at a level that's more comfortable for kids and to be more conducive to therapy. So it's quite warm. And I know they have a staff swim here weekly at the hospital. And I hear, I haven't done it yet, but I hear because the water's so warm, it's tough to do those lengths and get your heart rate up. And you get pretty tired pretty quickly. So good for the kids, not so good for the staff necessarily.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, that sounds, I mean, the pool looked pretty big, good sized pools. So it looked comfortable. And there's a bunch of, there's like a silent room. Like there was another room that was not for concussion, but for hyper, it's not sensitive, but like just hyper awareness for this other, and within not in the school, but near the pool. But it was very intense.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. They have it. It's called a snoozling room. So it's
right. Yes, that's right.
It's sort of a stimuli environment. So there's a lot of black light and different tactile stimulation, whether there's like pillows or other different things that you can sort of touch and stimulate the system. So for kids that have, it can work in both ways. For some kids, and often kids with developmental delay or autism, they really benefit from these environments where maybe they just need a calming environment to just sort of let that brain relax and the body relax. Or maybe they don't get enough stimulation in their everyday worlds, and they need to be in an environment where they can really tap into those opportunities. And the interesting part is they also have a pool that mimics the same environment. So it's quite amazing, where you can sort of take that stimuli heavy environment and transport it into water, which is also extremely therapeutic. So I know a lot of kids and families really benefit from those services here in the hospital.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's impressive place you got there, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think, and you know what, Nick, I think the best part about the place, yes, there's some great facilities and whatnot, but I know I sound cheesy when I say this, but I do say it often. It's and I'm sure you felt the same way when you came in. It just doesn't feel like a hospital, and it really is. The culture is set up to make kids and families smile at the end of the day, regardless of their condition and why they're here. And I think it, yes, the physical aspects of the building contribute to that, definitely, but it's really a cultural phenomenon here at Holland Bloorview, where I think it just makes people feel differently about their healthcare and in a more positive way.
Speaking of, you are an occupational therapist?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's your background. So, what part of that do you find is really good for? Like, that makes you a very valuable person to be the director of this concussion center, where you're trying to get kids back in the community, back to where their normal life and their interactions.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely, Nick. Thanks for bringing that up. I don't think I mentioned it in my intro. So yeah, my background clinically is occupational therapy, and my passion was always to bring sport and occupational therapy together. So traditionally, sports injuries and that type of thing are more of a physical therapy realm, but for me, growing up playing lacrosse since the age of 5 at all levels through junior A and through the university levels, and seeing a lot of my teammates get injured with various injuries, not just concussions, and myself included, I always wanted to see, how can I help athletes, how can I help kids in general just do the things, as I said before, that they need, want, and love to do. And I think the real unique part about occupational therapy to allow for that is that it really pushes outside of just looking at the injury or just looking at the person, but also incorporates the environment that kids do things in, or what's really important to these kids as far as their activities and what we call their occupations, what's meaningful. And you put the person, the environment, and the occupation together, and you start to get a really nice way to help kids get back to life.
Yeah.
So for me, I think bringing the occupational therapy lens, and now I'm fortunate enough, a lot of my graduate students and staff here in our concussion center, they also have this occupational lens. I think it just really allows us to look at this injury differently, where we're not just treating a headache or treating dizziness that these kids may have, but we're treating their whole life and their whole world and trying to get their whole worlds aligned to get them feeling well again and get them engaged, whether it's at school or with their friends or their families. And eventually, once we get a handle on all those aspects in life, we can get them back into the sporting world as well.
So did you talk to these kids about, well, just kids are only in the concussion center, but about their schoolwork, about like when they're in the school that's in your building in the Holland Bloorview? Did you talk to them about schoolwork and their plans for school?
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely, within our program itself, a focus on returning to school is paramount. So, we always say school and daily life before you even think about sports. So really focusing on getting these kids and their families some good strategies to get re-engaged in their school environment is really, really paramount. We have to get them feeling well. School is a pretty big piece for these young guys' lives. Some of them may not like to admit it, but it is true, and they do need to be at school and they need to succeed. And most of these kids want that. They want to succeed at school. So we really do need to work on that. So we work with school boards and individual schools and teachers, and more so giving kids and families the strategies and the tools necessary to connect with their schools and really have a successful return. Because there's no black or white or cookie cutter approach to returning to anything necessarily. There's always plan A's and B's and C's, and we need to make sure everyone's on board with the same information, same messaging, including teachers, to be flexible to best support these kids as they go through their recovery.
Yeah. Let's say, I was gonna say, so it says your kids' rehabilitation hospital, but how old are these? How old do you go? Kids are 18?
Yeah, great question, and we get that all the time. So our general practice is we treat and work with kids and families with kids under the age of, or 18 and under, so in their 18th year or under. So sometimes if care has begun prior to that 19th birthday, then we can still keep them in the service. But for the most part, it's 18 and under is the general rule of thumb within our hospital.
So basically up until they graduate from high school.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. And you also have like not just schools, you do like other minor leagues of soccer, hockey, lacrosse.
Yeah.
So what type of sports do you see, and what type of connections do you guys have with other minor leagues, or I guess city province pod leagues, sports?
Yeah, that's great questions. I'll touch on the first one first, as far as who we see and what types of athletes do we see with concussions. And I think people often think that it's always the high contact sports that are getting these injuries, whether it be hockey or football or rugby or even lacrosse. And that does happen, and there are higher risks in those sports. But we also need to realize that it's not just those sports where these injuries are happening. We see concussions in cheerleading, we see it in equestrian riding, we see it in synchronized swimming. So these injuries are happening across the board, and it's also not an exclusive injury to athletes. We see a lot of kids coming through our programming who have had injuries, whether it's in motor vehicle accidents or maybe tobogganing or just horsing around with buddies. And so this injury is happening. And I think when you consider that lots of different types of kids and lots of kids doing different types of activities are experiencing this injury, it really helps to frame your educational initiatives too. So, if we only thought hockey players were having concussions, then maybe we'd tailor all of our education only to hockey players and really only work with that community. But it's not the case. We need to make sure that we're reaching out to lots of different sports, lots of different types of kids, and making sure they all have good information and good messaging. So it is an injury that affects more than just the contact sport athlete and more than just the athlete in general. And I think for the second part, as far as our relationships with other organizations, we are, especially locally here in the Toronto area, we really just want to help kids and families get good information. And we do know there's a lot of kids out there playing organized sports, and it's a really great collaboration to work with these groups that are so motivated to support their athletes and their members. So yeah, we have a few really exciting collaborations underway now. Our most recent collaboration is with the Greater Toronto Hockey League. So this is a minor hockey league in the Toronto area. I believe it's one of the largest minor hockey leagues in the world. I believe there's about 40,000 members, or close to that, within the organization. And these are registered players, not to mention coaches and parents and trainers and referees and everyone else involved. So it's a very large organization. And I have to give credit to their executive director, Scott Oakman, for really making a push to do what they can to make players safe, and not just from a concussion standpoint, but across the board. We just are lucky enough to be working with them on the concussion side to see how we work together to best educate young hockey players and their families around concussion, but also to do some really great research around what actually is happening in that sport and how do we best support young hockey players moving forward. We've also had some really great collaborations with lots of different groups. So with the Toronto Argonauts, there's a fantastic champion out there, Jason Calero. He does a whole lot of great work in the community outreach around bullying and a lot of different issues. And he's graciously invited me several times to do some talks for some football audiences. We do some work with the Ontario Soccer Association, so a massive minor soccer group here in the province of Ontario, doing some education and outreach there, working with doing some interesting stuff with the Toronto Football Club, the TFC, with their academy members, their younger players, and getting some of my occupational therapy graduate students involved in those collaborations. But really, at the end of the day, if there's a group out there that wants to work together and try and get some support around concussion, whether it's locally here in Toronto or really anywhere, we're willing to help. We'll be there to do what we can to support.
Yeah, so I know you're talking about your connections with these sports leagues, and I mean your research happens within the hospital. But I mean, what would you? I don't know if I'm in the spot here, but of exciting research, what have you seen? Is there exciting research going on at Holland Bloorview, no doubt, but also in the community or just internationally? What would you say is the most exciting? Did you find, is there any real research being done on concussions that you find really exciting?
Yeah, well, I think, being a researcher, any type of research really gets me excited, especially if it helps kids and families deal with this injury. I think, pediatric concussion or kids concussion, it's an interesting field right now. So, the majority of work in concussion from a research perspective has been done to date in adults, and a lot done in sort of college-aged athletes, NCAA athletes, or athletes sort of 19 through 23 years of age type thing. So to date, there hasn't been a lot of specific focus on kids, both here in Canada, but also internationally. But I would say what's most exciting for me is that there's a lot of really, really great work going on in Canada right now, and across the country. There's a fantastic collaboration of great pediatric concussion researchers, all the way from the Maritimes, my friend Bill Montopar at UPEI, all the way to the other coast with some colleagues out in at UBC, Okanagan, and Paul Van Donkler, and Brian Christie in Victoria, and all the way in between. There's some fantastic work going on. And the great part, and I say this all the time about working in pediatrics, is it's a very collaborative environment. Most people aren't working with kids unless they really want to help them. And I think that's really encouraging, and power in numbers. And the more we work together, the more we can accomplish. So it is quite exciting. Yeah. Some of the things that are really exciting me now, specific to kids concussion, are looking at this idea of exploring interventions from a research perspective. So, rather than continued focus on sort of identifying the injury, where we still need work in that area, definitely. We definitely haven't solved any of these questions just yet. And assessment as well, so sort of what tools, what's going on when you have a concussion. Still work to be done, but I think what's exciting is a recent push into the area of, well, we know this child's had a concussion. How do we get them feeling better? How do we get them back to school? How do we get them back on the ice or on the field, whatever it might be that's important to that child? So there's some really neat stuff going on right now, where instead of using the traditional approach of sort of rest until you feel better, and I like to call it bedroom jail, so telling these kids to sort of sit in a dark room until they feel perfectly fine. Well, that might work for some kids, but not for all of them. And for those kids that aren't engaged in their lives for long periods of time, they're going to run into some trouble, and they're not going to be smiling too much at the end of the day. So we need to think about better ways to get kids moving again in a safe way and get them back to life. So there's some really great work being done by a colleague at Montreal Children's Hospital, Isabelle Gagnon. She started this push here in Canada around using active rehabilitation. So getting kids with persisting symptoms after a concussion, 4 weeks or more of symptoms, and get them moving their bodies again. So doing some light aerobic activities, whether it's running on a treadmill or on riding an exercise bike, doing some visualization exercises, and having some take-home programs where you can really apply this in a self-management type model. So with her leadership, there's a few other groups now across the country that are engaged. Ourselves here at Holland Bloorview are trying to contribute. There's some great work going on in Quebec at Trois-Rivières by a colleague, Dr. Phil Fate, a good friend of mine, and also at McMaster University. There's just this great group of people doing some good work. And we're exploring every day even other ideas around treating this injury. I know here at our hospital, I have a former postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Ann Hunt, who's now working on staff with us, developing some new clinical programming. But during her postdoctoral work, she was exploring some traditional OT, occupational therapy interventions, looking at cognitive strategies and changing the way you think about what you're doing in your life, and really creating strategies and plans to achieve the goals you need to. And then applying this to kids with concussion with some really great success. So I think it's working together with researchers, with clinicians, with kids and families, and figuring out, what are the ways that we think we can help these kids get back to their lives, and let's do some real good research on it and get that research out there so people can start using it. To me, that's what's most exciting.
Yeah, back to the point that there's a game echo in my headphones now. But you mentioned that there's the bedroom jail. Kids being trapped in their bedroom for rest and dark room.
Mm-hmm.
Because my first podcast with a friend of mine from university, Dr. Christian Goulet, he was saying he said the same thing about kids get tossed in a room, told to stay in a room and just not do anything, or just be at home and never see anybody and no simulation at all. He mentioned that was maybe not a good thing as people thought it was. And but also, so my last question is also about one of your it goes towards research, but also towards returning to school activity life. Is a baseline testing program? So
yes.
Are you involved in this baseline testing, or is this more your physios and OTs? So what's involved in the baseline testing?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a fairly new baseline testing program that's open to the community here, at least in Toronto. And really, I'll mention that this program was born out of some really great research. So our program actually here at Holland Bloorview started with a large research grant from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, a team grant looking specifically at this idea of baseline testing and what's really going on with that pediatric brain after a concussion, but comparing it to a pre-injury score on a variety of different measures. So within our baseline testing program and that study, we were able to put over 1,000 kids through that study and really get a good sense of what tools are useful and how is that brain recovering. So with our program, we like to say, the baseline test, it's not the end all or be all. So, if people are telling others out there that you do this baseline test, you're going to be perfectly fine, that's not the case at all. It's more selfishly as a healthcare professional to have a few more tools at our disposal to make good decisions on the behalf of these kids. That's where a baseline test comes in handy. But we still need to make sure that we're considering lots of factors after an injury and not just what that score says on a baseline, on a post-injury test of that same test that we did at baseline. There's more to the picture than that. So that's always important for people to understand, but it can be quite useful. So in our program, we'll test young kids, mostly athletes, before their season begins or before an injury occurs on a range of tests that we do some cognitive testing, we do some balance and agility testing, we'll do some strength testing, some concussion history questionnaires and some symptoms. And then if they go on to have a concussion, we bring them back in and we give them some good consultation and education around their injury and what things they need to apply to their day-to-day lives in order to start feeling better. And the way we reuse baseline testing is we don't start testing kids right away after they've had a concussion when their symptoms are really getting in the way of their day-to-day. We tend to think that we want to make sure that symptoms are resolving and they're feeling quite well before we tax that brain and body at a level that's going to make it feel worse. So we like to say, we want to make sure those symptoms are clearing up, and then we can start to re-engage those kids in these post-injury tests and get a few comparisons across individuals to see if they're, if they're deficient in certain areas. But again, it's one piece of the puzzle. So we want to make sure that we're taking that information and using it to the best of our ability, but also cluing into other factors that are taking place and really using good clinical training and clinical processes to guide recovery and decision making. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, baseline testing, there's still some work to be done from a science perspective on how to best do this and what are the best tools out there, especially in kids. But it can selfishly as a clinician give us some good information to inform our decisions. But bar none, it can't be the only piece of the puzzle. There has to be more that goes into that decision making than just a number that's being generated off a test.
You definitely get good information from that. And speaking of information, I'm looking at your homepage.
Oh, great.
I know it's a long, complicated name for the, not complicated, but it's a long name for it. But if people want to contact you or a concussion center, Holland Bloorview, how would they best go about that?
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that up, Nick. Yeah, anyone that wants to reach out, whether it's services or just general information around concussion, or even to get us out to a community event of yours to give out some information, you can reach out over our website. So www.hollandbloorview.ca/concussion. And you're right, Nick, it is a bit of a mouthful. So that's Holland, HOLLAND, Bloorview, BLOORVIEW.ca/concussion. So you can find all the information on our services, whether our clinical programming, our research programming, or our educational programming on the website. And from an educational perspective, there's some great free tools on there as well that you may want to look at and use in your own situations or in your own networks if you're a coach or a teacher or even a healthcare provider. That Concussion in You handbook for kids and parents that I mentioned, freely available on the website, both in a PDF and an ebook version. So hollandbloorview.ca/concussion handbook, and you can check that out and see if it's something that might work for you and those in your lives. And I would say as well, we try to have a pretty decent social media presence. So you can check us out on Twitter at our handle @KidsConcussion, or myself at Dr. Nick Reed, and you can follow along and see some of the initiatives that we have underway.
What about do you have a Facebook page?
So there is a hospital Facebook page that you can check out. So Holland Bloorview, if you just plug that in on Facebook, you can get some direction to Facebook. But right now, the majority of our social media is on Twitter at the moment.
Oh, yes, and I follow Kids Concussion and Dr. Nick Reed on Twitter as well. So and there I know they put up some great
handouts that I got when I was visiting there. I got handouts
Yeah.
that I've seen on Twitter. So just
Yeah.
so just some valuable information placed on Twitter.
Yeah, and we try to be as active as we can on there to
Yeah.
keep that feed pretty entertaining. So if you're looking for some regular updates around concussion and not just what we're up to, but some good resources, yeah, that's a good place to follow along at Kids Concussion.
Well, thank you so much. This is a very informative talk, and as we were saying, there's so much more to know and learn and find out about Holland Bloorview and about pediatric concussions. So please visit our website, follow them on Twitter, check out the Facebook page, and thanks again, Dr. Nick Reed, for this great talk, and you definitely helped a lot of people by letting them know about this. So thank you.
Well, absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Nick. And I will, again, give you full credit for all of your efforts and what you're trying to do to raise awareness around concussion in the community and abroad. You're doing some great work, and we're always happy to support your initiative. So thank you.
Well, thanks a lot.
Again, thanks to Dr. Nick Reed and the Holland Bloorview Concussion Centre. And thank you all for listening. The music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound. www.bensound.com.